Hi, everybody. I'm Bob Bowman, Editor-in-Chief of Supply Chain Brain, and I want to welcome you to this presentation on the business impact of digital twins, episode 5 in a series presented by Deloitte. One quick reminder before we get going, there will be an audience question and answer session at the end of this presentation. Audience members are encouraged to submit their questions at any time during the presentation by clicking on that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Now, digital twins are powerful tools that allow companies to simulate product and manufacturing designs virtually before executing them in the physical world. They also aid in network modeling, asset tracking, and evaluation of complex scenarios such as discrete event simulation. So today, we're going to learn how digital twins are being deployed across industries to improve business performance. We'll hear from two senior Deloitte Consulting leaders who have been helping their clients in this area for years. With that, I want to introduce our speakers for today. Kevin Prendeville is Principal, Supply Chain and Engineering with Deloitte Consulting, LLP. He has more than 29 years of experience in helping clients to create improvement programs spanning strategy, management consulting, digital transformation, product engineering services, and business process outsourcing. And Tim Roy is a creative fellow for strategy and analytics with Deloitte Consulting. Tim leads Deloitte's enterprise simulation offering, helping global clients in automotive, energy, manufacturing, and consumer products to adopt advanced digital twin platforms. Tim has more than 30 years of experience and is the head of user-centered design at Deloitte. Well, welcome, gentlemen. Good to have you both on the panel and on the presentation. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Kevin Prendeville. Kevin, take it away.
Thanks, Bob. It's a pleasure to be here. Tim and I are excited about the opportunity to discuss with you today. Today, we're going to go through 4 different sections. Tim and I will cover over the next half hour. The first, we're going to dive into what are the different digital twins that companies are using, and also how digital threads support them. The second section we'll get into talks about the core components that you need of a digital twin, including the metadata, the 3D assets, and the rest of the foundation. Section 3 will talk about the business improvements that you can see, and those span across a variety of different business areas. And we'll wrap up with what are the steps to get started if you want to begin your adventure into business improvements around digital twin. So if I look at the broad range of digital twins across the world, there are hundreds of different examples. If you look at the different hierarchy from components up to full products, if you look across industries, and if you look at what the actual digital twin is doing. For today's session, Tim and I are going to zoom into the digital twins that support the product development lifecycle, from design to manufacturing to service. So I want to get started zooming into each of these a little bit. If I start on the left hand of the slide, you'll look at what happens in the product development or the engineering departments around digital twins. And here, what our clients are doing is they're focusing on the 3D models. They're focusing on taking the requirements, connecting requirements to the product, and doing as many iterations as possible of the design in a digital format so they can simulate what might happen, how well the product is performing, how well it fits together, before they ever produce a physical element of it. And that saves tons of money and energy as you can iterate where it's simple and digital versus the spend you have converting a design into a physical element. So that's the first part and the first digital twin you find in the product lifecycle journey. If you would move on to the next slide, you look at what happens in manufacturing. So as the product moves to manufacturing, the product digital twin is used to leverage it, to understand the manufacturing steps that occur. So you can determine, are you manufacturing it in the right sequence? Is it as efficient as possible? And a second digital twin starts getting created, and that has to do with the smart factory. So today you'll see an additional twin that's existing in many of our companies, where you are designing the shop floor, you're designing the smart factory, and that can be a ground up redesign from a white field, or it can be a modification to an existing world. And what this helps you do is map out the flow, map out the stations, map out the tooling, all again virtually, so you can simulate activities long before you build a building or order any long lead items. And that has a tremendous impact around savings and time to market. The final part of the digital twin in the product lifecycle world is around service. So many of our clients produce products that have very long life cycles. Those life cycles can be 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 30 years, and they have products all over the world. So the service digital twin gets into a itemized individual twin around every serial number or VIN number. And that has to do with making sure that the manufacturing information is transitioned over to service so people understand how it was manufactured. But more importantly, it allows people who service the products in the field to design their spare parts mechanisms, design their MRO processes, all before a product is ever created. The second benefit it has, if you have products out in the field, you can study what is the actual configuration of each unit in the world. So that you can go ahead and understand unit 1, 2, 3 that's out in the field has this configuration. So when you send a service person out, they know exactly what parts to bring, they know exactly what to do. So the product is inherently fixed first time. If I look at our most advanced clients, they're actually using the service digital twin to flow information backwards. And that gets into IoT information coming back off the twin to talk about, as a product, am I healthy? Am I performing? Do I need upgrades? Do I need support? So digital twins, again, from product to manufacturing to service, span this whole area. If I look below the line, you'll start seeing a term model-based. And you have model-based in engineering, you have model-based in manufacturing, and you have model-based in maintenance. And the concept of model-based is a very important element of digital twin. What model-based means is the 3D model that is the core of the product is now exactly how the company tracks that asset. And all the surrounding metadata, all the supporting documents, everything you need flows with that model through time. So when we say model-based, we mean 3D is the master, or the model is the master from design to manufacturing to service. Now I want to introduce another concept that is often discussed in conjunction with the digital twin, and that has to do with a digital thread. So the digital thread is needed in order to connect all of the assets that are created from engineering to manufacturing to service. And the tighter that this digital thread is, the more effective a corporation is at leveraging digital twins, not only in isolation, but across the different parts of the business. Now, a digital twin itself is not a magical technology. It's an ecosystem of connected applications. You can see on the bottom of the slide here, and Tim's going to get into more detail on this in the next section, how PLM tools, MES, and other systems are needed in order to knit together the thread and manage all of the digital twins that are in place. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Tim, and he's going to talk about some of the core components that are critical to move forward with the digital twin.
Kevin, thank you very much. Making sure we get the advance to work properly here. There we go. All right. So Kevin's framing made it clear that we're spanning really a spectrum of potential applications. Sorry, I'm going to have to actually go back one. There we go. Span a spectrum of potential applications for your business. And while this is wonderful at a theoretical level and you can begin, it all starts to make sense, that also means that we're starting to engage with a whole series of enterprise systems, right? And so this is where it starts to get a little bit more complicated. And so as you can start to think, right, that PLM is the obvious one from a product lifecycle management, right? So some of the things that Kevin had talked about, but there's more. And so Kevin, I know you just started to introduce around model-based system engineering. Could you offer a little bit more color on that particular issue?
Sure, Tim. So, many people, when they think of digital twins, they think about the physical elements, which are important, but more and more products depend on the software that's within them or the software that they connect to and supports that. And that's where you get into model-based system engineering, MBSE, where you decompose a product into the different elements across mechanical, electrical, and software. And a key additional enterprise set of applications are everything you do for DevOps or ALM to manage the software that rides along with the product to make it perform, Tim.
Thank you. This will also then start to cut into other spaces, right? And so we start to think about the manufacturing execution side of the house and then the ERP, where you're going to be managing all of that, doing all that enterprise resource planning and thinking about all of those other assets where they live. And then finally, it also will then cut across into all of those IoT sensors that everyone has so faithfully deployed out into the world and the resulting systems that they start to connect to and inform. And so we start to see this really interesting interplay of all of these capabilities, but also these data systems that need to be brought together. All right, so what do we do about all that? So in the end, when you think about a digital twin, it's important to think or realize that it's ultimately all about the data, right? There are a whole thing, a number of considerations, although, Kevin talked about the model, and that is the 3D asset. And that's where people's heads go almost, sort of instantly. We start to think about this a little more broadly as an asset and realize that there's a few key points to take away. One, all those systems we just talked about do not share a common language. So there's going to be some level of reconciliation and understanding. How do we get what was called out in the 3D model, the same as what the ERP system thinks is the replacement filter that needs to be brought in, and so on. The second thing is when you're considering, we'll get into this in a little more detail, there are other considerations they bring in around kinematics, that kind of metadata and the things around how things move, the size of the asset itself, and some of the versioning. And to that end, while everyone uses and preaches the idea of single source of truth, you're going to find multiple versions. You're absolutely going to do it. And so that's something that you need to be thinking about and considering, because it's going to need to be reconciled, and we'll give you some ideas on how you do that. So what about those actual models that we're talking about? Well, despite all of those great and sort of very slick, photorealistic digital twins that we all love on YouTube, there are decisions and some options that need to be considered here. Primarily thinking about the level of fidelity and how those are going to be applied. So each one of them will have its own benefits, and there's going to be corresponding costs and complexity. So you can go with something as low fidelity as what we're seeing here on the left, all the way through the spectrum to photorealistic, where you're bringing an actual, a heavy-duty 3D artist who's going in and texturing and weathering things. Each have their applications, but these are elements that one needs to consider. So the good news here in this whole story is that we may not have to worry about some of the fidelity and scene building in the future. This would not be a true presentation if we didn't talk about generative AI. And so here's one example of how scene building is being transformed with AI. So in this clip, in its short, we're looking at a warehouse floor that's been laid out, and you can see they've already drawn a boundary around the space. Here, and you can't see it because it's too small, a prompt has been written for a GPT-4 integration, and look what happens. It's asked it to put together a typical warehouse set of assets into this scene. And so I'm hoping the video is going to be playing. Yep, it is. There it is. And so what's going to be happening is it understands that request. It has been trained on some of the assets, and you're all of a sudden, slowly, here it comes. It will have gone out to a repository of assets and actually pulled in all those components. So no longer is it going out and looking and hunting and pecking and finding each piece and placing it in the scene. Instead, it allows us to bring these scenes together and create major acceleration here.
QuickBase is the first application platform built for dynamic work management. Delivering a single connected source of truth, QuickBase empowers more than 6,000 global organizations by enhancing productivity and reducing gray work, the manual work required when current tools and processes don't get the job done. With AI capabilities, QuickBase accelerates project timelines, making it easy to develop applications that simplify processes and workflows and deliver access to critical project data for informed decision making. Learn more at www.quickbase.com. With that, let's bring Kevin and Tim back. And Kevin, back to you.
Thanks so much, Bob. Now that we've talked a little bit about what a digital twin is, what a digital thread is, and some of the assets that you need to do it, let's zoom into the business outcomes that you can expect going ahead and deploying these. So the market has been changing. Doing supply chain and engineering work is getting more and more complex all the time. And some of the ways it's changing, the digital twin can be a countermeasure to support. So if we look at the evolution that's happening, you'll see a number of things on the slide, from supply chain disruption to sustainability. But some of the things as it relates to product gets into the products are now becoming much more evergreen. It used to be that a product was launched and you kind of forgot about it and maybe you worked on the next one. And now what happens is the launching of a product into the customer's hands is really the beginning of that product's life. And it can be upgraded and changed over the years, either with over-the-air software or hardware or some combination of it. And digital twins can help a lot in this area. More and more companies are using global teams to develop portions of their product or all of their product, and those teams can be internal or external. Digital twin is a key element to bring that whole group together to focus on delivering and understanding and operating in a global landscape, both synchronously and asynchronously. And then the last point I hit on this slide gets into customization and personalization. So you've all probably been on a configurator looking at a product that you want to buy or ponder buying, and you can see how you can go ahead and use a digital twin to tweak it, whether it's colors or specs or something, to make it uniquely yours. And these are all some of the nice features that digital twins are doing. If I look at business benefits now inside a company, it all comes down to digital twins allow you to simulate. And when you're simulating, you're doing work, review work, and refinement work in a virtual space versus a physical space. And that can save tons of cost if you think about building things that are wrong. Operational efficiencies, as far as using assets correctly, inventory properly, has a tremendous speed to market, as you can find errors and issues with a design, whether it's the design or the manufacturing of it, quickly and change them rapidly. Helps with innovation as you leverage digital assets across the planet. And also collaboration is a huge thing. Tim, you want to talk a little bit about how you see collaboration playing into the mix?
Absolutely. Thanks, Kevin. As you mentioned around the global teams and this distribution of our workforce, we're seeing the use of digital twins for bringing these distributed teams together as one of the leading ways for folks to get started. I think the auto manufacturing industry has led the way. And really, as they're thinking about a new product, a new auto design or modification of an existing one, what you don't want to do is sort of go all the way through that only to discover that your manufacturing facility will need to be extended by 18 inches because it won't fit. And so instead, you're able to bring those teams together less in a parallel process, but more in collaboration to drive those kinds of outcomes well before a single piece of engineering has taken place. Back to you, Kevin.
Tim, yeah, collaboration is very powerful. Bringing this home a little bit more, if I think about in the engineering space of getting a product launched, digital twins essentially give you the ability to move faster and more efficiently. And the key thing there is not just the faster, but efficiently. If you look at a digital change versus a physical change, you might be saving 10 to 100 times the cost doing it digitally than doing it physically. If you look on the bottom left of the slide, you'll see 4 improvement areas as we think about the impact of digital twins on the product development process. The biggest impact is on product development itself, doing the design digitally, iterating rapidly on it, and also leveraging and increasing the reuse of components and digital assets across the globe. The second area that's most impactful has to do with when the cross-functional team starts studying a product. Historically, they might get involved later in. They'd look at a physical prototype and they would say, this is not going to be buildable. I won't be able to service this. It won't fit in our transportation mechanisms, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that causes a lot of feedback to the engineering department where they have to modify and churn and rework their designs to not just make sure the product is still functioning, but to cover all those cross-functional needs. You can now do that all digitally. That also has a downstream impact on your supply chain. Many of the complex products components are not designed in-house, but they're designed either with or uniquely by their supply base. So involving your supply base inside the digital twin as you're going through the product development and supply chain processes can help tremendously from a lead time, as if there's a shortage in some product that a vendor is supplying or a supplier has in its portfolio. They can identify that early, look at alternatives, or maybe change the design in some way to become less dependent on it. And if we go and look at the right-hand side of this slide, you can see how these four areas then have a corresponding impact around engineering, supply chain, ops, and product support using model-based design, virtual prototyping, virtual design for X, design for manufacturing, supply chain, et cetera, simulating service, simulating manufacturing, and so on. So Tim, now that we've covered these different first three sections, why don't you talk about how you would go ahead and get started attacking the digital twin area of a company?
Absolutely. So you're right, and hopefully by now you're starting to think, how are we going to actually get started with this? And so there we go. One thing to keep in mind as we get into this discussion is that a digital twin is not a use case. People will say, oh, we're going to do a digital twin use case. Well, a digital twin is not a use case. It is a platform upon which use cases can be developed and run. So that is sort of a foundational element to keep in mind. To go through this exercise, there is a certain amount of rigor from an organizational point of view. And the way we've recommend bringing this, or one way to approach this, is through these three different dimensions, right? First is looking at viability. It's understanding, is this actually creating value for my company, for my business, for my operations? The second is looking at applicability. That is this creating value for customers? And so this could be in a couple of ways. This could be external customers, people who buy things, but it could also be for internal customers, right? Understanding those folks. Are we creating and making material change for them? And then finally, feasibility. Lots of things are potentially possible, but you have to understand, can we actually do this? Does the technology, do our current systems and our current data, do these support it? Because that's super important for success. The winning combination is to hit that sweet spot where all three of those start to intersect. So let's talk about a little bit more about how you might figure that part out. There we go. So if you click down a level here, thinking about how you structure a use case itself and thinking about that definition is pulling together these kinds of components, right? First, generally, we see a lot of success with looking at manual process. Where are things currently being done? You know, as I described the idea of somebody designing the car and then bringing those designs to the facility, only to hear that they're going to have to extend a wall. And so, looking at these kinds of manual processes and how we can bring those together. Understand the users. Who can we create significant benefit and lift for? How can we take out the mundane or de-risk things and bring that together? And then finally bring together and be clear about a limited scope of the actual use case itself. You can bring to bear what we just looked at earlier around the impact, around value, applicability, and feasibility. So all of that can start to come together and give us this idea of a way to actually scorecard it and weight it. So what we're looking here, these are things that we've brought and suggested. Here are some ways of pulling them together, taking that new catalog of use cases and looking at these four dimensions. You can start to think about what this means for you as in your company. Are there other components that you might bring from a criteria point of view? And also for you as a company, are you going to weight them the same as we're suggesting here? There is no necessarily a right answer, but trying to get to that way of getting to a score that you can apply. And then, of course, since Kevin and I are both consultants, no set of slides would be complete without a good Foursquare. And so here we bring in the idea of going through all of that foundational work, evaluating, defining your use cases. You'll have everything to then start to align them into one of these quadrants. And what we've generally seen is looking at quick wins serve as great targets for POCs, real quick things that you can turn around and start to demonstrate the capabilities. Those strategic priorities are also ones to look at and focus in on, but understanding that there's going to require a little bit more time and energy to plan and execute them. And so with that, back to Kevin to take us home.
Hey, thanks, Tim. So recapping what we covered over the last half hour, 4 different sections. One, what is a digital twin? Or what are the different kinds of digital twins and how a digital thread can support that? 2, what are the key components as far as setting up your data assets, your model-based centricity, you're picking the right fidelity for the digital twins and the elements you have? 3, what are the different business outcomes you can get across the different areas and how to achieve those? And then lastly, as Tim just covered, how do you get started and how do you make sure you're getting the best bang for the buck for your investments in digital twin? Across your business and across what serves most your customers, your employees, and the overall industry. Back to you, Bob.
Thanks so much, Tim and Kevin, for that great presentation, really diving deep into the complexities of the digital twin and the value it brings to organizations today. At this point, let's move into the panel discussion portion of this presentation, which is actually me getting to ask you guys some questions that help us understand a little bit more about the topic under discussion. Let me start with you, Kevin. Are particular industries ahead of others when it comes to the application of digital twins?
Thanks, Bob. Great question. Absolutely. I think if you look at where companies and industries are, a lot of it dates back to how long they've been working with 3D assets in the first place. So companies that are heavy mechanical CAD orientate, whether it's aerospace, automotive, industrial products, they tend to have a lead in digital twins because they've been doing it for a long time, at least in the engineering area, which gives them that asset to then look to leverage across the rest of the company.
Is that how we should be thinking about digital twins? You said mechanical CAD. I'm just wondering, to what extent is the digital twin as we understand it today really an evolution of the old CAD/CAM, consumer computer-assisted design, computer-assisted manufacturing modeling? Or is it a completely different animal altogether?
Well, I think the basis of that is very much can be the CAD assets, but what it's done, it's been many versions further than that, Bob, as far as getting into how do you amplify that CAD asset, make it the core model that drives the enterprise information, and have the rest of the information anchor around that. That's very different than how it was years ago, when you were just doing CAD work in an isolated area of the company.
And I'm just going to jump right in and add to that in saying that we're also starting to bring in things like kinematics, like how do things actually move, and the physics pieces of the elements of it, understanding that dimensionality of it, which again typically has been part of CAD/CAM, but never brought together in a unified way of simulating it.
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks to both of you for not saying this is not your father's CAD/CAM. Leave the cliches to me, okay? Thanks for that. Okay, so with all this in mind, Tim, what can we be described as the actual foundational elements for a digital twin?
Well, again, reminding, what I just, saying what we just said, but going over the fact that this is a use case based exercise first and foremost. And so working through the rigor and discipline of defining a use case or use cases and understanding across the spectrum, not can we just do it, but is this potentially going to create value for us? Is this going to create material change for us as a business? And is it going to help us from creating leverage or acceleration in any number of spaces? The second component, I think, which is very important, is to have an actual sponsor from within the business. And we see a fair amount of this work being driven out of innovation groups, and so which is fabulous because it gives you a chance to play and experiment. But we encourage looking for a pathway into actual business execution and application. So even if you're coming from an innovation group, bring that business sponsor along to help drive and be ready to then move from that POC into something that is much more production-based or an MVP type. And then the third area is, as we've been talking about all along, the maturity of the data, the complexity and understanding where your data is and the components that go into it. Understanding that as you go into it will help you to work on that use case definition and prioritization.
To the extent that digital twins have been applied to date, what are some common lessons that have been learned in that experience? And let me ask you both that, starting with Kevin.
Bob, I think the biggest lesson is not a one-time exercise. So I think people think about a digital twin, hey, I'm gonna build it to solve problem of the day, situation of the day. And that in itself can be useful, but that's a lot of investment for a one-time solve. The lesson learned, I think the more mature companies have is making sure they're instituting new processes, new organizational change, and configuration management around the digital twins so it can live, it can evolve, it can be managed, and therefore it can be leveraged across the enterprise. If you don't do that, you can spend a lot of energy around a digital twin for a one-time exercise with very little future leverage. Tim?
From my perspective, I would add the other lessons learned is to, going back to it's all about the data, is recognizing that there are going to be multiple sources of data that will not naturally talk to each other or integrate with each other. So being aware of the fact that the more of an open approach you can take to this to bring together that PLM data, the model-based engineering data, the other components, your ERP, bringing those together in some neutral way or open way will allow you to get a much broader set of insights and capabilities than just choosing a single sort of flavor of digital twin as you go forward.
Thank you. So where exactly do you see the most use of digital twins right now? You guys have outlined a number of different areas in which it exists. Which departments, which areas of companies are making use of it at this moment? Kevin?
Bob, I think where you find it the most is where you have the most capital intensive processes, right? So that could be an industry or a process, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to delay the investment of capital to make sure when you're investing it and bringing it in, whether that's a prototype, whether that's a new factory, whether that's a repair and overhaul facility, that it's perfect or close to perfect. So using digital twins to do simulation, to do design and refinement, to find the errors, change the errors, modify the design, and then deploy the capital, that's where you see it. So capital-intensive industries where the processes trigger a big spend is where you want to try to leverage digital twins for the biggest bang for the buck.
Okay.
I would add what I mentioned the earlier about we're seeing it in the automotive space significantly, more so in the design up in the front side of the house versus in the back side and the full-on manufacturing. Although, it's getting there because of the collaboration and the need to iterate with diverse teams. The other area that we didn't talk much about is in looking at robotics and implementation of automated systems. So we're seeing a lot of folks in warehousing and large scale operational using digital twins as a manner of modeling and testing how a robotic implementation can execute, particularly in combination with humans, to see how that can begin to come together and create a viable set of new capabilities for a business.
We hear a lot about the way that digital twins generate these so-called what if scenarios that you can look at and then make a decision as to which of those is optimal for your company. But of course, it doesn't end there. Then you have to make the decision. I'm not sure if that's a human decision or a decision that's aided by AI. I'm wondering if you guys could just talk a little bit about the nature of those scenarios that we commonly see in the adoption of in the so-called physical world. Kevin?
Hey, you're exactly right, Bob. The digital twin allows you to iterate what if scenarios much more rapidly, right? So you can study 10, 15, 20, hundreds, even thousands of different approaches to how you would design or how you might solve a particular problem. AI helps amplify that, right? It can help you generate, more options. It can help you study the options. And ultimately, it can provide rule sets that can then be applied to the options to help filter and prioritize based on if rule set says this is the top way to do things. It can essentially grade your options for you and give you some initial guidance on what might be the best choice or choices to make.
Mm-hmm. Tim, you agree with that? I mean, the idea of just
I,
being paralyzed
I
by all these options that are being presented to you. How do you select the best one?
No, I think no, I do agree. What I would add to that though is with digital twins, we can bring a broader base of users into that decision making process through simplifying. Like you do not need to learn how to write discrete event simulation in Python. We're not going to see a lot of people in the C-suite doing that. However, we can create a digital twin that can capture and create an interface with variability to allow a more senior executive or a non-technical person to begin to play with some of the parameters or variables that they find interesting to test out, which is, a huge unlock for creating much more, much larger organizational adoption and alignment.
Great. So at this point, let's bring the audience in. They have some questions they'd like to ask you guys. And even as we are answering the questions that have already been submitted, audience members are encouraged to continue to submit questions, and we'll get to many of those as we can, time permitting. Now, this first question, which I'd like to direct to both Kevin and Tim, kind of plays off. You did make reference earlier in your presentation to artificial intelligence. I'd like to hear more. This questioner would like to hear more about how AI and specifically generative AI can help with digital twins. Kevin?
I'll take the first cut at that. I think it's obviously a huge buzzword, Bob, and it's highly impactful and everyone wants to talk about it. But pragmatically, Gen AI does have and will continue to have a tremendous impact as it helps bring forward the knowledge of a company, the knowledge of an audience, the knowledge of an ecosystem to the individual contributors doing work. So it provides the world of knowledge to help be your co-pilot as you go forward on a task. Additionally, what we're seeing now in many design tools is they have Gen AI capabilities to help you with wargaming, simulation, and creating of options, which then makes you more of a master to study the options versus doing all the work to create them in the first place. Tim, how would you add to that?
I think the other component here is that as we're seeing generative AI adopted in the manufacturing space or in the heavy industry space or the asset-based industry space, we're creating all sorts of interesting new capabilities. I have a client in the energy space who, used to spend weeks and weeks and weeks doing pipe specs for hydrogen facilities. All of a sudden, that knowledge can be condensed into a single, large language model that can be done in weeks, or done in days, if not hours. However, it's still going to produce an Excel spreadsheet, right, or some sort of document. Now we can take it the next step and drive it into visualizing it, actually driving it into the twin to further validate how that will work. So we go from minutes to, from weeks to minutes to actually seeing it the full life cycle. So I think that's a very powerful consideration, is a digital twin is an endpoint for a number of generative AI outcomes.
Yeah, it seems like it's a technology, though, that was just crying out for AI. The two of them just seem like they're so linked in their applications. Thank you for clarifying that. This questioner wants to know where you see the next generation of digital twins going. Tim?
I think we're going to start as these mature, we are going to start seeing if we start at the asset level, right, you can create a digital twin of a single piece of a product or a single machine or device or an engineering cell or a factory. We're going to start, my belief is we will start seeing a more network-based view where we're starting to move from the micro to the macro and allowing us to move in and out and understand that kind of simulation and the cause and effect. For instance, looking at supply chain issues, not necessarily from a logistics point of view, from a weather point of view, and bringing that from that macro view all the way down into the impact on that particular manufacturing cell, for instance. Kevin, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I like the network analogy, Tim, and I think I go back to one of the slides you had with an IoT control tower. And Bob, that's where I think it's going to continue to mature, where you have feedback now coming from the field, coming from the assets that have been made smart and connected, providing that back to a central place so they can say, how is the network performing? How are all my cars out in the marketplace doing? What about my assets? And you can start identifying with that macro twin of the network and all of those assets trends that you may be able to become predictive on to say, hey, if this unit over here is failing or starting to see characteristics of failure, how can I look across more broadly all the assets and be premeditated in making changes to prevent damage in the future? So I think it's getting very much from the unit level to the network level.
I love hearing the way that all these different technologies are just falling into place and interlocking so beautifully. You have the control tower, you have IoT, you have AI, and of course, over the whole thing, digital twin. It's really great to see all that coming into reality. Okay, so this person wants to know what specific business processes are need to be established or changed with digital twins. Kevin?
It really comes down to some will be established and some need to be changed, Bob. So the establishment is really around how are you going to put in place the standards to manage the digital assets and the configuration of them over time? Because if we build a digital twin of the product today, that's going to become stale at a different rate per industry, but it will become stale over time. So in the past, you may not have had groups that configuration managed the digital twin. Now you have to. So that's a new group. A change group will be, how do you make sure it's getting used? Right. So if I now have this digital twin asset that our company has invested in, how do I make sure that the process for doing a design review, the process for studying for DFX, for serviceability, for whatever it is, takes advantage of this, is forced to take advantage of that and becomes just starts becoming the standard way of working within that company.
Okay. Jim, you have any observation about business process change?
Well, yeah, I think that as Kevin points out, that there is always going to be an organizational change management exercise in play. Like it or hate it, it's something you have to do and consider. The more that you're looking at taking away either repetitive tasks or things that are creating frustrations, creating some level of understanding around how this is an improvement and allows people to become better at their jobs is really, really important. I think the other is understanding that it's no matter where you are today, it will be different in 6 months, 12, and 18 months. And so the more of the foundational work you can do around that use case rigor and discipline, creating that capability inside a business is going to create a very promising roadmap for success for any business that's looking to adopt this approach.
So glad that our audience member asked that, because we've got to remember that every discussion of technology has to be accompanied by a discussion about business process change as well. Otherwise, nothing's going to happen. The question here is, how are end users actually interacting with digital twins? Do we have to get everyone a VR headset? Tim?
No, I would say no. I think and I think that's an important point for sponsoring folks to understand, is that no, we're not going to be putting people in headsets and it's all going to be Ready Player One, over and over again. There is a place for that, and we are seeing some level of adoption. But in general, we're looking more at flat screens that people can interact with, and as I mentioned before, building interfaces, simplified, purpose-built interfaces that will live on top of those, so that folks can start to actually interact with the twins at varying levels of complexity. We are seeing a trend towards the use of AR, which is bringing, as Kevin had talked about, some of the service work, being able to bring the action, having the digital twin, for instance, on a tablet, and being able to bring that to the actual space and being able to see the difference or the deltas that occur within that. And then I don't think we're going to get them on phones quite yet, but I think we may be heading there. So, anything you want to add to that, Kevin?
I think it's making sure it's consumable, Bob, right? If you build these assets, how can it be consumed by the biggest audience to take advantage of that? And in some cases, it might be a VR or AR. In other cases, it could be much simpler mechanisms to do that.
Certainly, we cannot wait with digital twins until the development of these wearables, which have been stop and start kind of advanced that particular technology is making, not necessary to advancing with the digital twins. Good to know. This questioner is asking, do you need governance inside a company around digital twins? Kevin, I assume the answer is yes, but maybe to rephrase the question, what kind of governance do you need?
Yeah, the question is more than yes, Bob. The question is absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think we talked about that a little bit before around, something as simple as configuration management. If you're going to have digital assets, if you're going to have digital twins, those need to be governed and managed in a specific way so that they are controlled and that you can rely on them, right? Because now you're going to make more and more decisions around the data in a digital twin. If that data is incorrect, it can be more damaging than before when you never had one. So the governance to make sure that digital twin is to the right standards and is evolved and you can trust it and leverage it is what needs to be in place to really make this work.
Again, another aspect of business process change coming up that's so important.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Tim, I'm going to give this one to you. Can all industries benefit from digital twins?
I like the governance question better, but
sorry.
I think I would, I'm not sure we could say exhaustively. I mean, I don't think we've done necessarily research, but I think anyone, certainly asset-based industries, folks that are dealing with, either discrete or large-scale manufacturing and production are absolutely in target. We are seeing a much broader application in healthcare, life sciences. We're seeing it in transportation, defense, and so on. So I'm hard pressed to think of anyone where it would not come into play. I do think the difference between creating a digital twin of a factory floor versus a digital twin of a human heart for allowing people to learn how to do open heart surgery, we're probably not quite there yet, but I think we will get there at some point in the future. So I think it's going to be a question of I'm going to be the repeating myself over and over. It's going to be based on the use cases.
Sure. Now, we have laid out several different types of digital twins. We talked about it at the product level, the manufacturing level, and the service level. This questioner wants to know what other digital twins are there beyond the ones you highlighted. Kevin?
Yeah, there are many, many, but to bring some to life, Bob, we've got the ones that often face customers. So you can think about a product configurator if you go to an automotive website, or a try on the clothes configurator, or try on the glasses, right? There's digital twins that are often used to help market and sell, configure, and order products. And that's one area we didn't talk about, but is very much adjacent and complemented by what we did.
What about supply chain? What about there? Tim, do you have any idea how that might apply?
When you say could you repeat the question?
Well, we're talking about what other types of digital twins are there, and I'm wondering the logistics side of it, which now we understand must be brought into the picture at the stage of product design when the digital twins is being applied there. What type of digital twins might apply to logistics / supply chain?
Absolutely. So, there is effort underway building something called Earth 2, which is a digital twin of the Earth and its climate systems and weather patterns and so on. That's a fairly large program, as might imagine. And so you could think about how that weather prediction and simulation of weather and its impact on supply chain and the actual moving things from source across the ocean or through the air or what have you is one way to consider it. The other that we've done some work in is around looking at cybersecurity and risk. Again, looking at networks and building a digital twin of your actual networks and using it to simulate various threats and intrusions to understand your response patterns, the timing, and how you may be able to work against those in order to safeguard your overall enterprise system.
Or the whole nature of risk lends itself to the what if scenario. So you would think the digital twin would be a natural for that as well. Thanks for that. Kevin, this person wants to know what are some of the barriers to implementing or scaling, in particular, a digital twin solution?
Some of the barriers gets back to, I think, what Tim was talking about in his section. It comes down to, do you have the digital assets that you need? Are those assets of the right fidelity? And is the company ready to embrace them to change a business process for improved performance? I think if you look at section 2 that Tim covered on the foundational elements, and then section 4 on what are the use cases that are actually worth doing and that my company and our culture will allow to happen is the key. So some of the barriers are technical and some of the barriers are just good old-fashioned change management, Bob.
Yeah, there we go again with that change management business process. Tim, do you agree with that? The same kind of.
No, absolutely. And it can be incremental change. And, there's nothing wrong with working things in parallel. If you can begin to run that, understand the benefits, it allows you to really create the level of confidence that you're looking for in the people that matter that are going to make that transition. So I think that's incredibly important, and we see a lot of that where people are running systems side by side, and it can be heavily validating and another source of data to understand and continue to refine and improve.
Tim, maybe a quick answer to this one. I just wonder the question is, are digital twins, quote unquote, user friendly to design and implement?
They're getting there. When you saw the GPT-4 one, that was pretty friendly, right? You type in a thing and it creates it. Where it gets tricky, if I'll say it again, if the use case is well defined and you understand, it's more that not just building a digital twin of a scene, it's how you're going to use it. Is it physics based? Is it operational based? Is it relationship based? As long as that can be defined, there are components of it that are fairly straightforward, but I would not say it's at the PowerPoint level quite yet.
Yeah. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for your answers and that great presentation and audience questions as well. Unfortunately, I have to tell you that we are just about out of time. We have time for one final question. I'm going to pose it to both of you, starting with Kevin. How would you best summarize this area for people thinking about moving ahead with a digital twin program?
I think digital twins are proving to be very impactful across a wide range of industries and business areas, but you get nothing for free. It's not magic. So companies need to put in place the foundation, the data standards, processes, digital assets to realize the benefits. Tim, what would you add to that?
Again, to say that the digital twin is a platform upon which you are going to build new and powerful capabilities. And so it's critical to think about that, defining that body of use cases that will allow you to get the maximum benefit out of that platform itself. You think about where that impact can be achieved, and then prioritize that foundational work and the organizational change management that allow that the vision of the digital twin can be realized incrementally, as benefits are continuously achieved by the organization.
Well, again, gentlemen, thank you so much, Kevin Prendeville and Tim Roy, for that fantastic presentation. Really deep dive into the technology, the application, the benefits of a digital twin. I think our audience learned a lot in the last hour. I do want to offer our audience something in exchange, and that is listen in for the next one. Stay tuned for our next episode in this Deloitte series. It's about the smart factory at Montreal, Believers Made Here. August 8th, 2024 at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time. There's a QR code that you can scan to register, but needn't rush to do that because that will also be provided to all attendees of this webinar upon conclusion of the webinar, which I'm sorry to say is now. Thanks again, everybody. Thank you, audience, for your attendance, and everybody, have a great day.